a majestic wild Mustang, abandoned to his fate after a brutal wolf attack. His wounds were so severe that even the wildlife rangers believed he wouldn't survive the night. But what happened next, when a stranger appeared in the remote Nevada wilderness, changed everything we thought we knew about the will to survive. Get ready for a story that will warm your heart and challenge everything you believe about courage, hope, and the unbreakable spirit that binds humans and horses. The brutal Nevada winter showed no mercy. Thunder, a magnificent 7-year-old Palomino Mustang, struggled through the snow-covered hills of the Great Basin. Once the proud leader of his herd, he now traveled alone, separated during a violent storm 3 days earlier. His golden coat, once gleaming in the sunlight, was now matted with sweat, dirt, and blood. His powerful muscles strained with every step through the knee-deep snow. The harsh mountain winds carried the scent of pine and ice, and above him, dark clouds gathered ominously, threatening yet another storm. Thunder paused at the top of a wind-swept ridge. His ears perked forward. He sensed danger before his eyes could confirm it. The howl came first, a long, mournful sound that sliced through the whistling wind. Then another.
And another.
A pack of wolves had caught his scent, their hunger sharpened by a harsh winter that had decimated the deer population. Their calls echoed through the valley, a primitive communication system honed over thousands of years. Each howl conveyed information: direction, distance, vulnerability. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the snowy landscape in shades of amber and violet, Thunder realized he was cornered. Under normal conditions, Thunder could have outrun any threat. His powerful legs once carried him effortlessly across open plains, where speed gave him the advantage. But not tonight. The deep snow slowed every stride, and days without proper food had drained his strength. His breathing came in ragged bursts, each exhale forming clouds in the freezing air as he scanned for any possible escape. The first wolf appeared below the ridgeline, a large alpha, with piercing yellow eyes that glowed in the fading light. 2 more emerged beside him, their gray forms slipping through the snow like ghosts. Their movements were fluid, practiced, and deadly. Then 4 more wolves emerged from the trees, fanning out to surround Thunder in a near-perfect arc. Every exit was sealed. Thunder pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring. He was preparing for a fight he couldn't win, but he wouldn't surrender.
더 울브즈 어택트인 윤허전.
A coordinated assault, refined by evolution itself. Thunder reared back, lashing out with his hooves. One connected. A sickening crunch followed as a wolf yelped and rolled away, its shoulder crushed. But the others pressed in, darting close to nip at his legs before retreating, a tactic designed to exhaust prey too large to bring down quickly.
원 울프 런지드.
Its teeth sank deep into Thunder's hind leg, shredding muscle. Another tore into his flank, opening a jagged wound that sent blood streaking down his side. Thunder fought with everything he had, kicking, striking, screaming into the darkness, but with each minute, he weakened. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll. His final cry echoed across the pass, a defiant sound, raw and desperate. But it was not enough. As night settled in, the great Mustang collapsed into the snow. His proud frame, battered and bloodied, sank into the icy earth. The wolves began to circle again, closing in for the final blow. Their eyes glinted in the moonlight, 6 pairs of malevolent stars dancing with hunger.
엔드 댄 라이트. 디스턴트. 아우터피셜 빔즈 커트스로 더 다억 윌더니스.
The sudden intrusion stopped the pack in their tracks. Headlights. A vehicle. The primal fear of mankind, the only predator wolves truly feared, overrode their hunger. After a tense, lingering moment, the pack slinked back into the forest shadows, growling with frustration. Thunder lay alone in the snow, steam rising from his wounds, his body broken, his breath shallow. Death seemed inevitable, but fate had other plans. Those lights were getting closer. Dr. Ellie Morgan wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this stretch of remote Nevada wilderness. The 34-year-old large animal veterinarian had taken a wrong turn hours earlier while driving back to her modest clinic in Carson City after checking on a ranch horse. The snowstorm had wiped out road signs, and her GPS had lost signal in the mountains. Now, as her Jeep's headlights cut through the swirling darkness, Ellie's only goal was to find a main road before she ran out of gas. The needle hovered just above empty, a steady reminder of how isolated she truly was. "Just my luck," she muttered, peering through the frosted windshield. Her wipers screeched across the glass, barely keeping up with the falling snow. 5 years ago, Ellie had left a prestigious position at a San Francisco animal hospital to follow her dream, opening her own rural veterinary practice focused on horses, cattle, and ranch livestock. Nights like this made her question that decision. The comfort of city life, the apartment with central heat, the regular schedule, still tugged at her now and then. Especially when she was alone, lost in a storm, in the middle of nowhere. Her train of thought broke when her headlights swept across a ridge ahead and froze on something strange. A large shape lay collapsed in the snow. Streaks of dark red spread around it. Ellie slammed the Jeep into park. She grabbed her emergency kit and flashlight from the front seat, pulled on her thick gloves, and stepped into the brutal cold. The wind hit like a slap, and her breath caught in her throat as her wrist thermometer registered -15 degrees Fahrenheit. What she found stole her breath. A Mustang. Magnificent, even in his broken state. His golden coat, though dirty and soaked with blood, was unmistakable beneath the pale moonlight. Wolf tracks surrounded him. Dozens of them. Ellie didn't need to be a tracker to understand what had happened. The horse's eyes followed her warily. They were clouded with pain, but alert. Steam curled from his wounds, his blood hissing against the snow in ghostly wisps. "Hey there, big guy," Ellie whispered, keeping her voice calm as she moved closer, crouching low to appear less threatening. Her flashlight beam revealed deep gashes across his hindquarters and flanks, ripped flesh from wolf teeth. One particularly bad wound on his rear leg was still bleeding steadily. He wouldn't make it through the night without help. But treating a wild horse out here, exposed to the elements, was dangerous. Even injured, a single kick could be fatal. Ellie had seen it happen before. One of her colleagues had lost an eye in an accident just last year. Still, something in the horse's gaze gave her pause. There was intelligence there. A silent plea. A dignity that refused to be crushed by pain. "I'm going to help you, if you'll let me," she said gently. She pulled off one glove and extended her hand, palm up, letting him catch her scent. To her surprise, he didn't try to get up or flee. Maybe he was too weak. Or maybe he understood. Carefully, Ellie knelt beside him and began her work. Ellie worked quickly, her hands steady but her heart pounding. The wind howled around her like a living thing, sending flurries of snow swirling through the air as she examined each wound under her flashlight's beam. Thunder's muscles tensed when she poured antiseptic on the lacerations, but he didn't lash out. His eyes never left her face. She cleaned each gash as thoroughly as she could, wrapping pressure bandages around the worst of them. Blood soaked through the gauze quickly, but she did what she could to slow the bleeding. All the while, she whispered soft reassurances, more for herself than for him. Then, almost without warning, the blizzard intensified. Snow came down in blinding sheets. Wind speeds climbed past 50 miles per hour, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Ellie looked around, her flashlight barely able to cut through the whiteout. Her Jeep was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. The temperature plummeted further. Her wrist thermometer now showed -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Frostbite, hypothermia. Neither she nor Thunder would survive much longer in these conditions. She looked at the wounded Mustang. Then back at her Jeep. There was no time to hesitate. "This is completely insane," Ellie muttered to herself, already running through the mental checklist of what needed to be done. Back at the vehicle, she folded down the rear seats and threw open the back hatch. The Jeep Cherokee doubled as her mobile vet unit, usually for carrying supplies, not 1,000 pounds of wounded horse. She shoved heavy gear cases toward the front seats, making as much room as possible in the rear cargo area. Thunder lay just 20 feet away, snow blowing over his still body. Those 20 feet were now the distance between life and death. The wind cut across the ridge like a blade. Ice stung her cheeks, and her lips were starting to go numb. She gave Thunder a mild sedative and pain reliever, just enough to dull his senses, not enough to make him unsteady. Then, from the back of the Jeep, she pulled out an old emergency tarp and 2 sturdy road boards she normally used for traction in mud. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She anchored the boards to the rear bumper, using the tarp to create a makeshift ramp, shaky, narrow, and far from ideal, but it was the only path forward. Ellie returned to Thunder's side, kneeling close so he could hear her over the screaming wind. "All right, Thunder," she said softly, resting one hand on his neck. "I know you don't trust people, and I don't blame you. But right now, I need you to trust me. It's either this or we both freeze to death." She rose and gently urged him forward, guiding him step by step. Thunder didn't move at first. The wind howled around them, pushing at his battered body, tugging at Ellie's jacket like ghostly hands. She stood beside him, one hand gripping his mane, the other steadying his flank. "Just a few more steps, boy," she urged, her voice shaking with cold and emotion. "We're almost there." Thunder pawed at the edge of the tarp, testing it. His nostrils flared. His instincts screamed against stepping onto something unnatural, especially in his weakened state. But he didn't back away. With a courage that defied logic, Thunder lifted one massive hoof and placed it onto the ramp. The boards groaned under his weight. Ellie held her breath. Inch by inch, he moved forward. The ramp trembled with each step, the wind shrieking around them like some ancient warning. Halfway up, Thunder's injured hind leg buckled. He stumbled, nearly toppling off the side. "No!" Ellie shouted, throwing her body against his flank, using everything she had left to keep him upright. Her boots slipped in the snow. The ramp shifted. "You can do this," she whispered fiercely, bracing him with trembling arms. "Don't give up now." With one last, desperate push, Thunder lunged forward, collapsing into the back of the Jeep. His powerful body filled nearly the entire cargo space, his breathing shallow and erratic. Ellie scrambled in behind him, pulling off the makeshift ramp and slamming the tailgate shut just as a violent gust of wind threatened to rip it from her hands. Silence. Inside the Jeep, it was as if time had stopped. The storm outside still raged, but here, inside this small metal shelter, it was quiet enough to hear Thunder's labored breaths. Ellie threw thermal blankets over his trembling form and checked his pulse again. "You made it," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You incredible, stubborn, magnificent animal. You actually made it." She glanced at the dashboard. -25 degrees Fahrenheit. A temperature that could kill within 30 minutes of exposure. They had narrowly escaped death. But their fight wasn't over yet. Thunder's wounds still needed treatment. They were stranded. Fuel was low, and no one knew where they were. Ellie reached for the ignition and turned the engine, coaxing heat into the cabin. She looked back at Thunder, who now lay curled in the back, his body shivering, eyes barely open. "Looks like we're in this together now," she said quietly, staring out into the blizzard beyond. The blizzard showed no mercy. Ellie huddled in the driver's seat, wrapped in every layer of clothing she had. The Jeep rocked beneath the fury of the wind, groaning with each gust like a ship tossed in an angry sea. Every hour, she turned the engine on for 10 minutes, just enough to generate heat and prevent them both from freezing. Then, she'd shut it off again to conserve what little fuel remained. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty, a quiet threat that never left her thoughts. Thunder lay curled in the cargo area, wrapped in thermal blankets. His breathing had stabilized slightly, but Ellie knew better than to be reassured. His wounds were deep. The risk of infection was high. And in these conditions, even minor complications could become fatal. She checked his vital signs by lantern light. His pulse was still fast, too fast, and his body, though covered, felt warm to the touch. Too warm. Fever. "Not now," she murmured, placing a hand gently on his neck. Ellie rummaged through her supplies, pulling out the strongest injectable antibiotic she had left, one she usually reserved for critical cases involving ranch livestock. She cleaned the site on Thunder's neck as best she could and warned, "This might sting a little." Thunder flinched as the needle went in but didn't resist. His eyes followed her, clear and focused in a way that startled her. For a horse in his condition, That kind of awareness was rare. "You're a fighter," she said softly, stroking his neck. "A real fighter." Outside, the wind howled louder, and snow piled higher against the Jeep. The weather radio she kept in the glove compartment crackled to life, announcing a grim update. All rescue operations had been suspended until morning. Road crews wouldn't be out until daylight, maybe longer if the storm continued. They were completely alone. Ellie pulled the blankets tighter around Thunder's body, then sat beside him in the cramped rear space. The Jeep smelled of antiseptic and blood and cold metal. She kept talking, to Thunder, to herself, to the darkness. "I used to dream about this kind of work, you know," she said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "Saving the ones no one else would bother to try for." She told him about her childhood on a small ranch outside Billings, Montana, how she used to sneak out at night to sit with the horses in her grandfather's barn. How she fell in love with wild Mustangs through old photos and news stories. How she left behind a high-paying job and a failed engagement to follow a dream that most people didn't understand. "My ex said I was crazy. Said I was wasting my degree on animals no one cared about," she whispered, checking Thunder's temperature again. "But he was wrong. Every life matters. Especially yours." As if in response, Thunder let out a low, soft nicker, the first sound he had made since she found him. Ellie froze. Her eyes welled with tears. That sound, faint and tired, was the most hopeful thing she had heard in days. In that tiny metal box surrounded by snow, battered by wind, the bond between them deepened into something far more than survival. Sometime after midnight, just as Ellie began to doze in the driver's seat, something jolted her awake. Thunder. A strange sound, ragged, unnatural, escaped his throat. She scrambled into the back of the Jeep, panic flaring in her chest. His breathing had changed. It was shallow, erratic. His body, though blanketed, shivered violently. His gums were pale, and the warmth she'd felt earlier had now spiked to something dangerously high. Shock, blood loss, trauma, and fever were overwhelming his system. "No. No, no, no," Ellie breathed, her hands flying to her emergency kit. Her training kicked in like second nature, precise, focused, even as fear clawed at the edges of her mind. She pulled out a bag of 4 fluids, a sterile line, and her blood pressure cuff modified for equine use. Establishing a vein in a full-sized horse was never easy, but in the tight space of the Jeep, it was nearly impossible. Her fingers, numb from cold, worked with trembling determination. She found a vein in Thunder's thick neck, cleaned the area, and inserted the catheter with practiced efficiency. The moment the fluids began to flow, she let out a shaky breath. "Come on, big guy," she whispered. "Stay with me." She began talking, almost non-stop, her voice a fragile thread of hope connecting them in the storm. She told him about vet school, about her long nights studying while working part-time at a horse rescue, about the Bureau of Land Management and her growing frustration with how wild Mustangs were rounded up, penned, and forgotten. She told him about her dream of starting a foundation to help the ones left behind. "You're not just a horse," she said, brushing damp hair from her face. "You're a symbol of everything wild and free. And I'll be damned if I let that die out here in the snow." Thunder stirred beneath the blankets. His breathing was still labored, but the 4 was working. Slowly, his pulse began to stabilize. His eyes, once glazed with fever, found her face again. In those eyes, Ellie saw more than pain. She saw understanding. She kept talking, telling him everything, things she hadn't said aloud in years. About the fiancé who left her. About the doubts that crept in on quiet nights. About the way horses, especially wild ones, had always made her feel less alone. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak. The Jeep groaned under the pressure of snow piling on the roof. Winds ripped through the mountain pass at more than 60 miles per hour. They were entirely cut off from the world. But inside that cramped space, a fragile light refused to be extinguished. Ellie checked Thunder's temperature again. It had dropped a few degrees, still dangerously high, but better than before. His ears twitched at her voice. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that no longer felt as frantic. "You're not done fighting," she whispered, her hand resting gently on his neck. "And neither am I." The first light of dawn brought with it a haunting stillness. The blizzard, after nearly 18 relentless hours, had finally exhausted itself. Snow still drifted lazily from the clouds, but the furious wind had calmed. The world outside the Jeep was blanketed in white, peaceful, beautiful, and deadly. Ellie awoke with a start, cramped and stiff in the driver's seat. Her first thought was of Thunder. She twisted around, heart pounding. He was still breathing. Relief washed over her like a wave. His condition had stabilized during the night, thanks to the 4 and antibiotics. The fever had broken. The bleeding had stopped. The worst, it seemed, had passed for now. "Morning, fighter," she said softly, brushing snow off the rear window. "We made it through the night." She grabbed her phone. Still no signal. The Jeep's fuel gauge hovered on empty. They had to move, or risk being stranded for good. Ellie opened the driver's side door and stepped out. The cold hit her like a wall, sharp and biting. Her boots sank deep into snow nearly up to her knees. She trudged around the vehicle, assessing their situation. And then, she saw it. Smoke. A thin, wavering column rising from a chimney about half a mile away. A cabin, hidden in the trees beyond the next ridge. She stared, hardly believing her eyes. "Thank God," she whispered, her breath clouding in the still frigid air. Help was within reach. But that help came with a price. She turned back to Thunder, who lay resting, wrapped in layers of blankets. His eyes opened when he sensed her approach. They followed her, calm but alert. "I need to get help," Ellie said quietly, kneeling beside him. "I'm going to leave you here for a little while, but I swear, I'll be back." She rechecked his bandages, administered another dose of antibiotics, and left him with a small container of water tucked safely beside his head. The warmth in the Jeep should hold for a while longer if the engine was run briefly every hour. "Hang in there," she whispered, pressing her hand against his neck one last time. She closed the cargo door gently. Then she turned toward the cabin, and began walking. The snow was punishing. Every step through the knee-deep drifts demanded effort her exhausted body could barely give. Her legs trembled. Her breath came in ragged gasps. But she kept moving, her focus locked on the wisp of smoke curling into the cold morning air. When she finally reached the porch of the weathered wooden cabin, her knees buckled with relief. She raised a trembling hand and knocked, hard. "Please," she prayed silently. "Please let someone be home." After a moment that felt like eternity, the door creaked open. A man in his 60s stood there, eyes sharp beneath thick gray eyebrows, a salt and pepper beard framing his weathered face. He blinked at the stranger standing on his snowy porch, half-frozen, wild-eyed, and desperate. "My name's Ellie Morgan," she said breathlessly. "I have a wounded Mustang in my Jeep. I need help, please." The man stared for a heartbeat longer, then nodded. "Name's Jacob Blackwood," he said, stepping aside. "Come in. Let's get you warm." Inside the cabin, warmth hit Ellie like a wave. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, its golden light flickering across hand-carved wooden furniture and shelves lined with old books and lanterns. The scent of pine logs and coffee grounded her as she sank into a worn armchair near the fire. Jacob handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Eggs and toast all right?" She nodded, still catching her breath, her hands shaking as they gripped the mug. As they ate, she told him everything. The storm, the wolf attack, the injured Mustang now lying in her Jeep. Jacob listened in silence, his weathered face unreadable until she mentioned one detail. "A Palomino stallion," she said, with a star-shaped marking on his forehead. Jacob's head jerked up. His eyes narrowed. "Say that again?" Ellie frowned. "Yeah. A Palomino. Gold coat, white blaze. The mark looks just like a star, right in the center." He stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a worn leather-bound album. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and faded notes. He flipped through the pages with surprising urgency until he landed on a photograph. "Is this your horse?" he asked, handing her the image. Ellie took it. Her breath caught. There he was. In the photo, a proud Palomino stallion stood at the head of a wild herd, his mane tossing in the desert wind. Even in black and white, the star marking was unmistakable. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Thunder." Jacob smiled faintly. "That's not Thunder," he said. "That is Spirit." He sat down across from her and began to explain. 5 years ago, Spirit had led the last major wild Mustang herd in this part of Nevada. They roamed freely across protected land nearly 40 miles south, until the Bureau of Land Management intervened. In an effort to clear grazing space for cattle, they initiated one of the largest roundups in the state's history. Helicopters. Holding pens. Families torn apart. But Spirit was different, Jacob said, reverence in his voice. He didn't run with the others. When the choppers came, he doubled back, right through the BLM line, created a distraction so his mares and foals could escape. Witnesses said it was like something out of a movie. Ellie sat in stunned silence as Jacob laid more photos and headlines before her. Ghost horse evades capture. The Mustang who outsmarted the government. Spirit of freedom. He became a symbol, Jacob continued. Wild horse conservation groups used his image for fundraising. Lawsuits. Petitions. Spirit stood for something bigger than any one horse. But about a year ago, he vanished. No more sightings. We figured he'd either been captured or killed. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced out the frosted window toward where her Jeep was parked, half buried in snow. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I just saw a horse in trouble." Jacob leaned forward. "And you saved him. That means something. Document Spirit's not just a horse. He's a legend. And now, he's in your care." The urgency in Ellie's chest reignited. Spirit, not just a Mustang, but a living symbol of wild freedom, was fighting for his life in the back of her Jeep. And time was running out. "We need to get him to your cabin," she said, standing. "Now." Jacob nodded and grabbed his coat. "Truck's out back. I converted the bed years ago for hauling timber and supplies, lined it with straw and reinforced the sides with plywood. It'll work as a temporary trailer." Minutes later, Jacob's old pickup groaned to life. Ellie followed him out into the snow-covered landscape, her legs still aching from the earlier hike. The storm had left its mark, drifts nearly waist-high in some places, but the sun was finally up, casting a soft glow over the mountains. As they approached the Jeep, Ellie's heart pounded. It was buried in snow, the back end barely visible. She rushed to the tailgate, brushing snow from the handle with trembling hands. The moment she opened it, Spirit's eyes met hers. Still alert. Still alive. "I'm back," she whispered. "Just like I promised." But his condition had worsened. His breathing was faster now, shallow. The infection was fighting back. They had to move, fast. Together, they fashioned a new ramp using Jacob's timberboards and Ellie's tarp. They positioned it between the Jeep's cargo floor and the bed of the pickup. Spirit would have to cross it, injured leg and all. "Easy now, Spirit," Jacob murmured. "Take it slow." Ellie knelt beside him, her hand on his neck. "You can do this. You've done harder. You're the horse that outsmarted helicopters, remember." With their support on either side, Spirit slowly rose. His legs wobbled. Blood from reopened wounds stained the tarp. He stepped forward. Halfway across the ramp, his injured hind leg buckled. He lurched sideways, nearly toppling. "No!" Ellie shouted, throwing her body against his to keep him from falling. Jacob did the same, both of them pushing back with all their strength as the Mustang fought to steady himself. "Come on, boy," Jacob grunted, boots slipping in the snow. "You're almost there." Ellie locked eyes with Spirit. In that moment, she didn't see a wounded horse. She saw defiance. "Fire. Will. Your Spirit," she whispered. "You don't give up." With a final surge of strength, Spirit lunged forward, landing in the truck bed with a thud that rattled the vehicle. Blood streaked the straw beneath him. Ellie climbed in immediately, applying pressure to the wounds. "Drive," she called out. "Drive now, we're losing him." Jacob slammed the tailgate shut and raced back to the driver's seat. The truck jolted forward, tires gripping the snowy terrain as it began the slow, dangerous journey back to the cabin. In the bed, Ellie knelt beside Spirit, whispering words of comfort, her hands stained with blood, her eyes locked on his. His breathing was labored. His body trembled. But he was still holding on. As they crested the ridge and the cabin came into view, Spirit's eyes began to close. His chest rose, then fell. "No, you don't," Ellie whispered fiercely. "We're almost there. You don't get to give up now." Spirit's eyes fluttered open, fixing on her face. In them was the same quiet strength he had shown that first night in the snow. And Ellie knew, if he had made it this far, he wasn't done yet. Jacob's truck skidded to a stop outside the cabin, tires crunching through the snow-packed path. Ellie didn't wait. She leapt out of the truck bed and shouted, "Get the stall ready." Inside, Jacob had already cleared out the old barn next to the cabin, a sturdy structure that hadn't seen a horse in years. He'd lined a stall with thick layers of straw and flannel blankets, and a propane heater blasted warm air to keep the space above freezing. Spirit, still barely conscious, had to be moved quickly. Ellie and Jacob fashioned a sling with cargo straps and a heavy top. It took every ounce of strength they had, and more, but slowly, inch by inch, they eased the massive Mustang down from the truck and into the warmth of the barn. He collapsed the moment he hit the straw, muscles quivering with fatigue. Ellie checked his vitals. His temperature was holding steady, but the blood loss had taken a toll. His gums were pale. His heart rate elevated. Infection still loomed. But he was alive. She worked through the day and into the night, never once leaving his side. She cleaned and sutured every deep wound, flushed infection from torn muscle, and administered antibiotics in calculated doses. A former colleague, now stationed at a veterinary hospital in Reno, arranged for emergency medical supplies to be airdropped by drone: fluid packs, pain meds, stronger antibiotics. For a week, Spirit hovered at the edge of death.
엘리 베어리 슬레프트.
She set alarms every 2 hours to check his pulse, his hydration, his temperature. When she wasn't working, she was talking, to Spirit, to herself, to whatever higher power might have been watching over them both. Jacob brought meals, repaired fencing,
텐디드 더 파이어.
but he always left Ellie to her work with the horse. "You've got a bond," he said one night, standing in the barn doorway. "Don't see that often."
나 like this.
Ellie didn't respond. She was stroking Spirit's neck, whispering softly. His ears twitched at her voice. That was all she needed. Each day brought small victories, Spirit standing for longer stretches, taking a few slow steps, nickering softly when Ellie entered the barn. The infection receded. His coat began to shine again beneath the healing scabs. And in his eyes, the fire returned. After 3 weeks, he whinnied for the first time, strong and clear. It brought Ellie to tears. By the 2-month mark, Spirit could trot again. He circled the snowy corral with growing confidence, scars like pale battle medals across his flanks. His mane caught the wind like a flag of defiance. "He's ready," Jacob said one morning, stepping beside Ellie as they watched the stallion paw at the fresh snow. "Question is, are you?" Ellie didn't answer right away. Her heart ached. She had never felt a connection like this, not even with the horses she grew up with. Spirit wasn't just another patient. He was the reason she became a vet in the first place. But he wasn't hers to keep. "He belongs out there," she said finally. "Leading.
러닝 프리.
That's the life he was born for." She looked down at her gloved hands, then back toward the corral. "I'm just the one who helped him get back to it." Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. Snow began to melt in patches, revealing stubborn tufts of grass beneath the warming sun. Streams that had once been frozen solid trickled back to life. The air, though still crisp, carried the scent of earth and pine instead of frost. It was time. Ellie stood at the edge of Jacob's property, her boots crunching softly against thawing ground. Spirit trotted confidently around the corral, his golden coat gleaming once again under the clear morning sky. The wounds had healed. Scars remained, but they told a story, not of defeat, but of survival. Of triumph. He was magnificent.
untamed, alive,
Ellie had spent the last few days preparing.
no halter,
No blanket. Nothing that would mark Spirit as anything other than what he truly was, a wild Mustang.
a creature born of freedom.
That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the mountain ridge in hues of amber and gold, Ellie opened the gate. She said nothing at first, just stood there, watching. Spirit approached cautiously, nostrils flaring at the change. He paused at the threshold between enclosure and wilderness. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked back at Ellie. Their eyes met. In that shared gaze was everything. Gratitude. Trust. Goodbye. Ellie's throat tightened.
This is it, old friend, she whispered. You are free. Spirit stepped through the gate.
For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the open land before him, the wind, the trees, the echoing silence of possibility. Then, with a sudden burst of strength, he reared up on his hind legs. His front hooves slashed the air. His cry, a triumphant, thunderous neigh, echoed across the valley.
Ellie's breast caught.
And then he was gone. He galloped into the wild, his mane streaming behind him like a banner. The last rays of sunlight turned his coat into liquid fire. He disappeared over the ridge, not once looking back. But Ellie didn't need him to. She stood in silence long after he vanished, the empty gate swinging gently in the breeze. Her eyes burned with tears, but her heart was full. Spirit was home. 2 months later, a package arrived at Ellie's clinic in Carson City. No return address, just a note in Jacob's familiar handwriting. You'll want to see this. Inside was a photograph taken by wildlife researchers monitoring wild horse populations in the high valleys. It showed a herd of Mustangs, strong, swift, healthy, led by a Palomino stallion with a star-shaped marking on his forehead. Spirit. He had not only survived, he had reclaimed his role as leader and protector. Ellie smiled through tears as she hung the photo in her clinic. Beneath it, she placed a small brass plaque with a single inscription. Freedom is worth fighting for.
Every life, no matter how wild, deserves a chance.
Spirit's story would go on to inspire more than just those who knew him. Conservation efforts across Nevada picked up new momentum. Donations surged. Ellie established a foundation dedicated to the treatment and rehabilitation of wild horses, one she named the Spirit Legacy Fund. And every time she looked up from her desk and saw that photo, she remembered.
Hope can rise from the snow.
Healing can begin with trust. And some spirits are too wild to break.